welcome to yet another episode of ePunch. My name is Nyokabi Nanga. Allow me to thank you for taking interest in this program. Again, ePunch is not a news program. Rather, it is a news feature program covering continental news peaks. This then means some stories, news stories to be precise, you'll hear on this program. Most certainly, you have encountered them elsewhere. However, we seek to make known uncovered facets of these news stories, as we call them here, news peaks. The aim of presenting these news peaks is to spark conversations. And at ePunch, we do not believe that news can be stale. News just builds up. In the interest of time, playing next are voiced audio clips from some of our listeners, that is Kim and Charles, who sent their opinions on our recent episodes.
Comment by Kim. A big thank you for podcasting such content for this generation. Also for the release of this feature episode on the state of some of the African nations. A big shout out to you and your producers for such wonderful content. Comments by Charles. Very insightful thoughts on FGM. I would never imagine anyone trying to return it, but hopefully the ban will not be lifted. I like the different stories that captured a lot more African countries and stories. I got more news of what's happening around the continent. The call back to the migration episode done in the Africa Dialogues podcast was also quite spot on. Oh, and on the disaster management, Kenya is the perfect example of a place where we get warnings on time, however action takes place after a tragedy happens. It is like we react to the situation as it develops, and we never plan for it in advance, which begs the question, does the government ever take the meteorological department seriously, or do they just sit in their offices and hope for no tragedy to occur even if though they have predictions that it might occur? I believe that the ANC has a good chance of scooping these elections. No comment on the rest as the topics are too controversial.
Thank you, Kim and Charles. You could have your opinions voiced as well by reaching out to us via email at thisgenerationafrica@gmail.com or on our LinkedIn page at This Generation Africa program. Moreover, you could follow us on our WhatsApp channel where you will get to hear of the regular updates of what This Generation Africa program is doing. Of note, our second program, Excel Sunday, is up and running, and in a brief, this program chances you as an African youth with the opportunity to feature as a host to your chosen topic. To emphasize, the topic should touch base with the demographic of young people. This is ePunch, a production of This Generation Africa program, otherwise known as TGAP, and at TGAP, we aim at working with this generation. On to our first segment. Today's news segment will capture the devastating floods that have ravaged the continent so far. This episode, or rather news feature coverage, has been inspired by the ongoings in my country, Kenya. In a brief, I'll state the facts, the hard news, and branch in with my take. Straight to it. The current floods in my country, Kenya, have costed the lives of over 160 people. As reports hold, more than 150,000 Kenyans have been displaced by this ravaging natural disaster, with heart sore about the Mai Mahiu incident where a nearby dam burst its banks following a blocked waterway channel. This ongoing floods resulting from heavy downpour come 5 to 6 months shy of the El Nino rains, which cause great havoc, most especially to people living in arid and semi-arid areas. As explained with regards to the present-day flood crisis in Kenya by multiple sources of experts, the witnessed overwhelming flow emanates from the effects of the El Nino rains in 2023 and the heavy downpour as of now, and given that there was a season of drought in the country, most especially experienced in northern areas, the soil became hardened, resulting to its lowered capacity in absorbing water. hence causing floods. In the Eastern African region, it was reported that the 2023 El Nino rains displaced hundreds of thousands of people, with some figures peeling millions, and sadly, some people lost their lives. As a result, rivers such as Tana and Athi in Kenya, Juba and Shebele in both Ethiopia and Somalia, and Ruvuma in Tanzania were reported to overflow. And with the registered long rains falling this year, the situation appears to be no different for some of these countries. Taking a step back to 10th September 2023 in Libya, the country, as a result of Storm Daniel, experienced hard-hitting floods stemming from heavy downpour. This incident caused major dams in the northeastern region of the country to overflow, resulting to more than 4,000 people losing their lives and 8,000 people plus declared missing. A similar situation, yet different, was witnessed in Ghana on October last year, where communities in the Volta region of the country, specific to those living close by Kapong and Akosombo Dam, were displaced due to an overflow of the two aforementioned dams, displacing over 20,000, as news reports hold. The difference in this scenario is that this incident was a controlled measure by the concerned Volta authorities in regulating the water levels in these two dams, which were overflowing from the heavy downpour experienced then. In Cameroon, March 2023, as reports held, heavy downpour resulted to floods affecting many, as placed on Bankolo district in Yaoundé, the country's capital. The heavy downpour caused flash floods and mudslides, resulting to lost livelihoods and lives as well. Close by was Nigeria in 2022, which experienced floods in over 30 of its states, which total 36. Reports say 34 out of 36 states were affected. Looking at one of Africa's archipelagos, Sao Tome and Principe, the case was no different. In 2022, reports of flooding were made known, and closely following in 2023, the same scenario happened. Looking back at history, it is evident that most, if not all, African countries have experienced floods of one kind or another. Currently, South Africa had an incident this year on April, which saw residents of Magat in KwaZulu-Natal province affected, counting losses and 5 lives gone. And Algeria, this March, was reported to be experiencing inundation as well. Globally, Russia, Kazakhstan, Oman, Dubai, Brazil, and the countries in honest keep adding have or are experiencing floods, as reported by international media houses in the recent. China, in Guangdong province to be specific, has been making headlines as well after torrential rains which have ravaged people's homes and their possessions, claiming lives and destroying infrastructure.
Floods are inevitable. In the event you are in an inundated area, some of the steps you could take to keep safe include avoiding swimming, walking, or driving in flooded waters, keeping off from fallen power lines and electric poles to avoid electrocution, wearing suitable outfits and footwear, example, a life jacket and rubber boots, eating cooked food and drinking boiled water, marking open sewers and manholes conspicuously to avoid fatalities, and using sticks to check the water depth if you need to traverse flooded waters. This announcement interlude was brought to you by This Generation Africa Podgram. Note, in no way are we playing the role of any concerned authority or institution in your country. The pointers given apply to all in the face of this disaster. We encourage you to follow the guidelines as stipulated by your country's authorities. This announcement interlude is grounded on informational purposes.
At The Punch, we use news to spark conversations.
In the quote segment, I don't know how many of you have heard me tell about the hummingbird, but I like to tell about the story of a hummingbird because quite often we feel overwhelmed. So this story of a hummingbird, which I learned from Japan, is the story of a forest that caught fire. And it was a huge fire, and it was raging. And all the animals came out of the forest and stood by the edge of the forest, and they were watching the fire. They were very overwhelmed. They were powerless. They felt like there was nothing they could do because the problem was too much for them, except this little hummingbird. The hummingbird said, I'm going to do something about the fire. So it flew to the nearest stream, took a drop of water, and flew back and put it on the fire. Then back again, brought another drop of water and put it on the fire. And it kept going as fast as it could, every time bringing a drop of water and putting it on the fire. In the meantime, all these animals are discouraging it and are persuading it not to bother because it is too little. You have a beak is too little. You are bringing very little water, and some of the animals that are talking like that are the elephants with the big trunks, which could bring much more water, but the hummingbird just kept doing what it knew best without wasting any time. And to stop them when they said, what do you think you are doing? And the hummingbird said, I'm doing the best I can. And for me, and I hope for you, that's all we can do. Whoever we are, wherever we are, there is something in our lives that we can do. No matter how small it is, collectively, it will make a difference. So be a hummingbird in your community, wherever you are.
This quote on Wangari Maathai was extracted from the Botanic Gardens Conservation International's YouTube repository. No copyright infringement intended.
My Take segment.
Floods, droughts, tornadoes, name them, are some of the natural disasters otherwise referred to as climatic conditions facing us all. Seemingly, we cannot escape Mother Nature with its twists and turns, and neither can we escape the consequences of climate change. I must attest it gets emotionally tangling reading through the numbers of people affected by the spoken natural disaster that is floods, and often when news is regarded hard news, one is often led away from the truth that it is just not numbers off, but lives of people affected greatly. My condolences to all those grappling with the aftermath of the inundation in the individual countries. Taking a look back at history, it is on records that human beings have witnessed natural disasters of one kind or another, for it is inevitable. Another thing witnessed when one takes a backseat to the viewing of moments in the past is that human beings have been innovating for long, especially with concerns, measures, or infrastructure, aiding them in preventing consequences of natural disasters, for example, floods. A case in example, ancient China, which saw the building of dams, reservoirs, dikes to prevent water overflow in the face of heavy rains, or even in the cases of ancient Egypt and Cushitic civilizations here in Africa, which on top of dams, reservoirs, and dikes were canals as innovative ways to prevent inundation or flooding. But no matter how floods or any natural disaster seem all too common to humankind in terms of their recurrent happenings, the truth remains the consequences are all too fresh and deeply painful. Truthfully, can I state, humanity, with their divine attributes and with their source of power, God, or as referred to by some, the higher being, innovation will always be present amongst us. And while this fact remains, many still question the response of our governments towards inevitable disasters. How prepared are we? Are governments proactive or reactive is spoken of by Dolly in our last episode. Moreover, are we as people acquainted with necessary information to keep safe and save our lives in the event of disasters? Do we take warnings trivially? Are our cities built to stand the weathering storm, and do we take time to see the future in the things we are creating now? Do certain questions have answers? I don't know. Allow me to leave it here. Playing next is an extracted clip, speaking more of what has been laid out. Remember, you can reach out to us with your opinions, suggestions, news picks via the provided platforms. Keep safe and goodbye.
The clip about to play is an extraction from a YouTube video courtesy of TEDx Place Destinations. Rohini Sampanam Swaminathan, featured in this clip as the speaker, is a geospatial expert with over 10 years of international experience working with the humanitarian and development sectors. She has worked in the disaster management field, amid other fields, training key decision makers in the world, and to this regard Africa, on ways to reduce risks emanating from disasters.
I grew up in a very small, remote forest in South India. You know, the kind with no running water, just me and monkeys running around. And as a child, one of my favorite things was to hold a telephone and talk on it. But for me to do that, my parents would have to put me in a bus and make a 100-kilometer trip. Technology still hadn't gotten that far yet. One day, it was in December of 2004. It was just the day after Christmas. I was 15 years old, and I woke up to the news of what would become the deadliest disasters of recorded human history. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami hit the eastern coast of India, not too far from my little forest, with several other countries nearby. It took the lives of over 200,000 people and left millions homeless. All that happened just in few hours. At that time, part of my father's job was go through coastal villages and assess the activities of the fisherman community. And for the very first time, when I went with him, I saw what disasters could leave behind. As I was walking through this small village, there was an old grandfather pointing at a mass grave, and he said, "We had to bury hundreds of people together because we didn't have enough time to dig individual graves." When the first wave hit, he said, news about these majestic waves, waves as tall as coconut trees, spread so fast, faster than the waves themselves, that people woke up and ran towards the ocean to witness this mystery. And the second wave, which was more forceful, took more lives with it. As an angry teenager, I asked my father why no one did anything about this. Why did this happen? And he simply replied, "Kiddo, ask what you can do if this happens again." And there I was, a teenage girl who was growing up with monkeys in a forest, listening to stories about how it was nature's wrath that took people's lives. And I certainly didn't think anything could be done. It was, after all, a natural disaster. But a couple of years later, when I had to pick major for my college, for the first time, I heard about this thing called geomatics. Now, geomatics is the study of collecting data about our planet. It could be any data: temperature, rainfall, vegetation, how high the mountains are, pretty much any data that we can collect. And the science of processing and analyzing this data into useful information. And 10 years later, today I work with UNITAR in their program called UNOSAT, where I do just that. When you look at this globe, there is not a single place we can point to and say, this is free from natural or man-made hazard. Disasters happen everywhere. In fact, in the last 2 decades, disasters have doubled in numbers. Satellite data helps us to visualize and respond in a way it was not possible before. For instance, let's look at floods, one of the most occurring natural hazards on this planet. In Thailand, during 2011 floods, satellite mapping showed us the complete extent of the flooded region, which we couldn't see it from the ground. We have satellites that can see through clouds or even during nights. Or forest fires. We can see fire hotspots from space. We can visualize them over space as well as time, which becomes important planning tool. This is crucial information which cannot be obtained from the ground. But if you live in a developed world, you might not feel it the same way someone does in the developing world. For instance, let me show you an example of what happened during the 2010 Haiti earthquake. This is a heat map which shows the destruction to the buildings in the capital city. Even the presidential palace was damaged. Yet the following month, a more powerful earthquake hit Chile in South America. It released 500 times more energy than the Haitian one. Chile lost 700 of its citizens, when compared to over 150,000 Haitians who died the month ago. Of course, there were some geological differences between these quakes, but Chile, as a country with long-standing history of earthquakes, was far better prepared. They have stronger building regulations in place. Even if we go back and look at the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, it took 2 hours to go from Indonesia to India. At that time, we had no way to warn the people. The killer here was not the tsunami in itself. It was not nature's wrath. It was lack of information, lack of an early warning system to let the people know, do not run towards the ocean, run away from it. As we look closely on again and again, there is nothing natural about any of these disasters. Natural hazards do not become disasters unless or until people are affected by it. And in most cases, these are the poor people who live in the most vulnerable settings with no preparedness. Development of a country is directly linked to the impact of any disaster. Our population is swelling, and it's going to cap at around 9 billion by 2050. 70% of that population is going to be concentrated in an urban area, which increases their vulnerability. When coupled with fast-moving effects of climate change, natural hazards will not only increase in numbers, but they will intensify. So instead of using the technology only to respond, it is more and more important to use the technology we have to better prepare, to understand the risks around us. We call this disaster risk reduction. For example, we know that 80% of Bangladesh is in a floodplain. We know that. If flood happens year after year, you may wonder why people still live there. Because floodplains are the source of some of the most fertile soil, so people will move back there to farm. But what if? What if we can tell a poor farmer in Bangladesh that there will be a flood a week before that happens so he can prepare, so he can anticipate?
We have edited this clip to suit the discussion in this episode. We encourage you to listen to the whole clip whose link has been provided in this episode's description box. We own no rights to this intellectual property. Playing it is on the grounds of fair use as a copyright provision.